of the things that you did and some of your earliest memories of White Lake?
Well, actually, we stayed around here. We didn't go to a lot of different places or do a lot of things. We just had a lot of fun. For me, it was just the experiencing of the lake and the area. It was the country. It was a getaway. It was just beautiful around here. And so we had a lot of fun. Paul had a little go-kart at the time, and we'd do that. Or just now and then, mostly it would be around the water, boating and water skiing. Going over to the yacht club for hot dogs and ice cream cones, and going out to the big lake and swimming out there. But it was mostly hanging around right here.
One of the things, dunes are a dynamic system. You know, change is natural and it has to happen. The problem with development is that it's the dunes can't really recover from some of the intense construction activities. They're degraded when their vegetation is removed. Construction in the dunes can change the light. It can change like little microclimates. When you stop the movement of the sand in the dunes, which development does, you change everything. Or we can restart dormant processes. You know, for example, if you do development in the back dunes, you can kind of start that sand moving again. So, development really, is a big change to the dune system. The biggest problem with development in the dune is fragmentation. When you cut the landscape up into smaller and smaller pieces, and aerial photos of the dunes show that this is already happening. And so that just really causes a lot of problem with the plant and the wildlife species. So
now, I don't know if you heard me. These people, Smiths and Nagels, insisted that their easement be along Brighton.
Okay.
You see all those pilings?
Yeah.
Those were from the logging days when they used to walk along there and pull the logs.
They're still there.
So now we're paralleling the water, right, Bob?
If it's down here, it will go along the water.
Probably just through coffee shop conversations, I became friends with Wenton Dahlstrom and Bob Wesley, and they were campaigners, against it. And I, like everyone else, thought they were nuts for quite a while, and then you began to realize that what they were talking about was pretty serious stuff, and they weren't wrong at all. In fact, they were right on. It just didn't get accepted well.
Being a businessman right in the downtown of Whitehall, did you hear, the other viewpoint or a variety of viewpoints?
Well, what you got was, particularly from the Hooker Company, kind of a clouded disclosures from their employees that they weren't really doing this or they weren't really doing that. But in moving out here at the end of White Lake in 1971 from the city of Whitehall, I can remember many days coming out where driving past Hooker you could scarcely breathe, and because of whatever they were emitting into the air. I used to ask the plant manager about that, and Hooker always blamed DuPont, and DuPont would blame Hooker. So I never did find out what I was breathing, but I often wondered what it was, but it took your breath away.
What was your understanding of the pollution problem from talking to Wendt and Bob, or just hearing it from other people in the community?
That it was serious. It was polluting water supplies and the lake, of course. And the type of pollution in the lake was, not the fertilizer stuff, but things you couldn't see, and contaminating, fish and wildlife, and might be a permanent situation.
Has your understanding of what was going on changed over time?
Well, it probably has, because at first I didn't believe them. So, but I believe it now. So yes, I guess it has.
Earliest memories were, it was always fun. Probably the going fishing with my dad, and then boating, and just enjoying the water. And it was a beautiful lake.
What about you, Becky?
I didn't know anything really about White Lake. I didn't spend time in White Lake because we lived obviously closer to Duck Lake. But when we first were married, we rented a home on White Lake, and that's when we fell in love. But the water was very, very low at that time.
Oh, like it is now.
The lower I think than it is right now. And we had to walk out to the boat to get into the boat. And we lived there for a year, and we always wanted to go back.
Was that in the mid-60s, maybe?
That was 1962 to 63.
We lived there a year, and then we bought the house on Alice Street.
And then moved to a country club, where we are.
Okay.
46 years we've been here.
What, when did you become aware that White Lake had pollution issues? Do you remember that, or problems?
Well, first we knew was actually when Wint Dahlstrom started his, telling everybody to be aware of this, be aware of that. And we would listen, but I'm not sure, when we'd ask friends of ours and this type of thing, and they assured everything, was under control. And we didn't know at the time, way back when, that there was a problem, but now we do.
So you had friends that were maybe management or workers in the companies?
Absolutely. Social friends, golfing friends. Fact is, if it wasn't for DuPont and Hooker, they all live in this area. Pinecrest division over here was built by a lot of the execs that live there. Where nowadays, like with Howmet people, they live in North Muskegon. They don't, and these people that lived here supported the community, supported the stores, was on school boards, was on city. They all lived in the area.
So it was, many of the people we've talked to already have said it was certainly a real positive
It was.
thing when the companies announced their opening and some of the,
I was not here at that time.
Yeah, we felt, it was good for the economics of the area, and it would all be good. As long as they, stayed under government controls, which they assured us they were.
Well, and I'm not sure that people even really thought a whole lot about pollution.
I think it started when we first started hearing about Love Canal.
Which was in the late 70s, maybe?
I think so. That's when we really got extra concerned.
Did you remember, now, it seems like the tannery was the focus at first, with the causing the weediness, and then the city of Whitehouse sewage plant, and that seemed to be the initial focus, and then in the 70s it was more Hooker Chemical.
Then it was Hooker.
Well, Don, you worked at the tannery during the
I
summers,
did during
and you know
college 1 year.
all about all the
I
sludge
know a lot of
and all
that. My dad worked there 33 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and
And
what was his experience, do you remember?
He was on the third floor of the tannery. He was in the finishing department, so he really didn't see where the hides were.
He would mention that he was concerned.
My mother would make him put his clothes out in the garage before he came in.
Because of the chemicals.
Well, not the chemicals.
On the
the
hides.
stink.
The odor, maybe?
The odor, yes.
Well, and I think most people who lived in the area could identify the odor, in certain, when the wind blew a certain way.
Well, that happened with Hooker, too.
Yeah.
You could smell that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when we lived here, we had two particular friends who were in our neighborhood that they were close friends of ours. And we had a couple of instances, I probably shouldn't even tell about them, but they were terrified. They told about us, the incident afterwards, and assured us that they were scared too.
They worked at the company?
Yes.
They were in charge of, I won't.
And so something happened that bothered them?
Yes, yes. One of the chemical trains had to be taken out of town, and he diffused it. And
Well, and you don't need to name names.
No, we're not going to.
And he assured us, and one evening there was lots of chemical smells coming in our neighborhood. And so we called one of them immediately, one of our friends immediately, and well, yes, there were emissions or something that they did at nighttime. And we were concerned, but we trusted them, and they assured us that it was safe. They lived here also, and so we kind of...
Well, you trusted them.
We trusted them.
Did they encourage you to go in the house and close the windows or anything, or take any action?
I don't remember that, but we did.
We did do
They
that,
took
but
the
I don't
children
remember
out.
if they told us to.
Did anybody else mention that at all?
We have heard accounts of odors from Hooker Chemical Company in particular, and then also times when there were the area's image when the pollution concerns were raised. I mean, was it something, because the
Very
area
much.
is a tourist area.
Yeah, we were concerned that people would stay away because of,
I don't know
All this
if it
spring.
did anything. I'm just wondering, did the tourists stay away because of it? I mean, I don't remember. I truly don't
I
remember.
mean, we had a lot of tourists back, in the
More than what we
seventies,
have
more than
now.
we do now.
Did any of them ask questions about, or ask you in particular about the concerns, or mention them to you?
Very few. I might have had a couple comments.
I think it's something that was just going on in every community at that time, that people weren't.
Well, and the times were
Concern.
different, certainly. We didn't have the internet.
They didn't
It's
have.
true.
The city was very puzzled as to what to do
With the tannery, for example?
with the tannery and with Montague's
Montague with Hooker
chemical
and DuPont.
plants. I don't really recall everything.
Well, and they were
But-
complicated issues, too.
They were very strong issues.
Obviously, logging is one of the major ones that occurred here back in the 1800s. You've seen these photographs before, where they basically, for lack of a better term, they raped the environment. When the lumber barons came here in the 1840s, they said that there's a century's worth of lumber that they can harvest. When they got going in the 1860s, it lasted 9 years. Now, you talk about having a non-sustainable type of practice. We don't want to use this model for our water resources, because right now, you'll hear a lot of people talk about how abundant the water is in the Great Lakes. Same thing they were saying 150 years ago about the lumber, right? It's amazing what humanity can do when they want to exploit a system. And we want to make sure, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we want to make sure we use the water, but we use it wisely, we use it sustainably. And then as a function, after the lumber industry died, it went bust, we started having all of this other types of industry move in. In the White Lake area in particular, you had Whitehall Leather, you had Hooker Chemical, Occidental, the municipal sewage all went in there through most of the 1900s until the Federal Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 and this started to be changed. As a function of all of this industrial discharge to White Lake, we had fish kills. The fish were tainted, you didn't want to eat them, and you had a lot of aesthetic problems associated with this. These plumes which would go out onto the lake, too many nutrients which would fuel algal blooms, you'd have these bad odors, the sediments would accumulate all of these contaminants and bury them in the sediments and cause problems. And then when you have a lot of algae that are growing, they die, they settle to the bottom, and the bacteria start to eat at them. And the bacteria need to breathe just like we do. And when we breathe, what do we take up? Oxygen. Well, the bacteria are sucking up dissolved oxygen out of the water as well. They can suck up so much oxygen that they can actually create anoxic conditions where there's very, very low oxygen. Just like in the Gulf of Mexico, these dead zones, we can get these in our lakes, and White Lake used to get that too. Now, they're not dead in a true sense. There's still life. So you've seen these kind of photographs before. Hyde Island from Tannery Bay, the barrels from Hooker Chemical. These are the kinds of legacies, the past abuses that you've experienced, that we've experienced here in the White Lake area, the kind of stuff that we've spent a lot of time and energy trying to restore. And these photographs show the purple mayonnaise associated with the cores from Tannery Bay. And now we're starting to get into this restoration phase to try and take us out of the past and into the present. Where we have tanneries, we end up having a lot of chromium because they use hexachromium divalent number 6 as a tanning agent. And what we did at the Annis Water Resources Institute is we measured the chromium in your sediments. The warmer the color, the redder, the oranger, the higher the concentrations. And the highest concentrations in White Lake were right around Tannery Bay, not surprisingly. This is what we mean by these contaminated sediments. This is the kind of stuff that not only creates environmental problems, because the bugs don't want to live in this, but it also can create human health problems. And this is why these sediments have been removed. About 75,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment were removed from Tannery Bay at a very, very expensive cost. We're paying for these ecosystem restoration projects now. 47 sawmills, about 18% of the original surface area of Muskegon Lake has now been filled in by sawdust, by slabwood. You take that 18% surface area, that is larger than 90% of the inland lakes in the state of Michigan that we've lost in Muskegon Lake. So, downtown Muskegon, Western Avenue, which is the main drag, Muskegon Lake originally went up to Western Avenue. So it's amazing how we've changed these landscapes as a function of these kinds of activities. And we too had our industrial abuses. This is downtown Muskegon, 1928, the Teledyne and Continental Motors factory. I don't know what that plume is, but it ain't good. And then we did direct dumping from these trucks or direct discharge right into Muskegon Lake. I mean, unbelievable kinds of, we treated Muskegon Lake just like White Lake was treated as a sewer. I mean, there's no two ways about it. So, with that uplifting past, I want to bring us into the present. There's actually a lot of good news in that, and because in the last 20, 30 years, we've learned about these environmental abuses. We've learned about what kind of health impacts it have, and we've started to make these kinds of restoration activities a reality. We've found the resources, we've engaged the community, and we've made a difference. And that's really worth celebrating. So now, in White Lake, you've got some fish populations, the perch populations are coming back. They've had a couple of really good years of recruitment. You've got the marinas for economic development and recreational development going on in White Lake. For the last 5 years, 6 years, we take our vessel, one of our research vessels, the W.G. Jackson, up here for White Lake Days. There's your fearless leader, Tanya, giving a narration about what's happened here in White Lake. Greg Munns, who's also been very involved in the restoration activities up here, is also one of our speakers here. And so these provide educational opportunities. I don't know how many of you have actually been on these cruises, but thank you. In the future, when we come up next year, I hope you will participate, go on this, hear what Tanya has to say as part of these narrations. It's fascinating. And you have an opportunity to do hands-on sampling, where you sample the sediment, you sample the water, and you get to experience this. What I often tell people when I go and give you a talk, and I'm not offended by this, you may retain, tomorrow, after maybe tonight, you may retain 10% of what I tell you today. That's about average. No matter how compelling a speaker I am, about 10 to 15% is what you retain. If you do it, if you actually do the sampling, you retain 50 to 70% of what goes on. No matter how bad the speaker is. Oh, well, in Tanya's case, it's different. Yes. So you have incredible aesthetics. Pure Michigan has now got White Lake on their website. So that's pretty cool in terms of Michigan's advertising. You have tremendous amenities here. You have the advantage of being a small town. I mean, when Tanya talks and says she knows everybody in this room, that is really cool. When I speak in Muskegon, I may know 25% of the people there because we tend to be a bigger city. The small town amenities, getting to know people, makes a difference. Being able to enlist an environmental history project and get all of you engaged is really, really cool. And so I love that. If my wife didn't have to drive to Grand Rapids every day, we would certainly think of living up in the Whitehall, Montague area. You have a lot of advantages in terms of your land use and your watershed. The green is shades of undeveloped, natural cover. Over 60% of this watershed is still in natural vegetation. That means you're going to have relatively healthy systems, a healthy watershed, a healthy lake. You're not there's not too much abuse coming in off the watershed. You still have a fair amount of agriculture. That's the brownish colors in certain parts of the lake, but agriculture is something that actually we should be taking advantage of in the future. Just make sure that the ag is done in a sustainable way.
Had a cottage down here on the north side, right at the end of Cook Street, and we used to go over there and picnic a little bit, and the kids would play in the lake. But that was probably back in the very early '60s, and it started to gain a negative reputation. They sort of closed down the swimming beach at Montague, and people got the idea you can't go in White Lake, and so it was in pretty sad shape at that point.
Do you have any memories when you lived in Muskegon? You have any memories of White Lake as a child?
Well, yeah, I went up here with my Uncle Albert one time. I was probably somewhere between 6, 7, somewhere along that line, and we went out ice fishing on the Ark. I remember that because it was very impressive. It had this big walk around inside and this big open area that you could fish in, and it was quite light, like the bottom was marl or something, and that I never found later on in my investigation of the lake.
So the lake bottom was white?
At that point, and I think it was located near the, out near the yacht club at the time we visited.
The Ark was anchored out there.
Mm-hmm.
And can you describe what the Ark was?
Well, it was a commercial enterprise that allowed people to come out and enjoy an indoor warm environment, but still ice fish in the center of this big open area in the Ark. And they served a light luncheon type stuff. And it was a unique experience for me. I never went back, but...
Yeah. Did you visit White Lake and swim or use the lake in that fashion as a child?
No. I was in the Muskegon area, and we used Muskegon Lake and Lake Michigan. And Muskegon Lake and White Lake have a lot in common, of course.
Do you, as a child or as a young person growing up, did you ever remember hearing people talk about White Lake or have any impression of White Lake?
Not until after I moved up here, and the impression was going downhill. Okay.
What were some of the early concerns that you heard about White Lake?
Well, first of all, the tannery was a big concern. And I was able to go over there on my own, and also with Wesley, Bob Wesley, and we would enter Tannery Bay, and there was an island in the center of the bay, had bushes growing off it and everything. When you got up close to it, the whole island was made of hides, cow hides, and that was kind of impressive. And there was a big, maybe 14, 16-inch tile coming out from their settling ponds. And I remember one time I brought Sam Townsend and his friend, both from Kalamazoo College. I brought them up here, and Bob Wesley took us out, and we went into Tannery Bay. And when we went in, the factory whistle went off, and a guy come running out there and turning off a big valve to shut off that tile coming from the settling ponds. Because I remember Bob says, it'd be worthwhile just dropping anchor to see how long they could wait for. They'd have to turn it back on.
Now, who were the folks from Kalamazoo College?
Well, I can't remember the one. One was Sam Townsend. That was L.D. Townsend's the principal here. That was his son, and he was an instructor at Kalamazoo College. I got to know them because they had a grant and I spent a summer down there. They had like 12 students in the senior level that were going in. My understanding is that his family used to summer up here on White Lake, and he lived down, or they lived down most of the year down in Chicago. And my understanding also is that he was a commercial artist, and he retired from that. He had real bad, I'd call it emphysema, and he retired early and moved up to the family home on White Lake and got involved with lake problems and became a friend of Wynton Dahlstrom's, and the two of them were a real strong impetus for changes to occur on White Lake. They hired Ron Ward to come up and be a consultant and do sampling up here.
Now, who is Ron Ward?
Ron Ward was a new professor at Grand Valley State University, which was a new university at the time, and I think he had a double doctorate, one in, I'm not sure if it was education, and one in science. And anyway, I got to know him a little bit then, and eventually wound up working for him.
What were the concerns about the tannery that you had, or Bob and Went?
Well, the concern was it was just obviously filthy, old practices from the turn of the century. Whatever was a waste, you threw in the lake, okay? Hides, whatever. Effluent from their settling ponds went into the lake. And it was, like I say, very obvious. The other companies weren't so obvious.
Did they meet with company officials or talk to politicians, or what are some other things?
Every avenue they could, they explored. They attended state meetings of I don't even remember, Natural Resources, Water, something.
The Water Resources Commission?
Yeah, back before it got changed to DNR, all those changes it went through, but they showed up at meetings there and voiced opinions about reports that the state was putting out that were very shoddy. In fact, Bob pursued that to the point where they actually withdrew that one report that I showed to you. It was horrendous. I went through that thing. He'd underlined everything, and it'd say, you know, this company is sending out 18,000 gallons a day into Lake Michigan. They have a permit to do so, and they're given a rating of A, but it doesn't tell you what's in that effluent. But they still get a rating of A.
What, did Bob have a scientific background, or what was?
Self-taught, I think. A very interesting person. He gave me a paper, I have it someplace, about his plan for hydrogen-powered vehicles. And he had it all laid out, how you would do it and how you would handle the energy and everything. And some, you know, they've experimented more recently with that concept.
So mentioned a sampling trip with the head of the DNR, the state DNR, where you noticed cattle hair in the lake.
We took samples clear out near the channel, and we were doing bottom sampling using a dredge. We brought it up, and you empty this into a screening box, and then you wash through it. And we got down to the end, there was cattle hair in there. And we had a person from the state with us. Like I said, I don't know if it was Water Resources Commission or what they called themselves at the time. And Bob pointed out, he says, that's there. You see that? You see that cattle hair? And he said, yeah. He says, I can't put it in my report. If I do, they won't accept it.
And was it a lot of cattle hair?
Not a lot, but it was definitely enough to identify that it washed all the way down the lake from the tannery. But
it started smelling like the back room of a dry cleaning establishment. And I got no help from any of the local people, and everybody kept saying, it's Hooker, it's Hooker. So I hired Wynton Dahlstrom, and we went after Hooker. And all we wanted was drinking water. In the meantime, I was getting water from across the street for drinking and cooking.